After 18 months adrift on the gray expanse of the ocean, all I wanted was to go home, slide into the driver's seat of my grandfather's 1968 Pontiac GTO, and find a rare moment of peace. But the garage was empty. In the corner of the living room, my father was popping the cork of a champagne bottle. He looked at me coldly and said, "Back already?" I sold the car. $150,000 for Kyle's wedding. That pile of scrap metal your grandfather left behind actually fetched a decent price. My duffel bag slid from my shoulder and hit the floor with a heavy thud. My chest tightened as if it were being crushed. Scrap metal! My voice cracked. That car was a 35-year legacy. It was my grandfather's honor. He had just sold out his own father's past to buy some hollow prestige for the in-laws. The phone in the breast pocket of my dress blues vibrated violently against my ribs. I answered, my hand shaking with rage. "Commander Janae Lester?" The man's voice on the other end was urgent, grave. "I'm Daniels, from the Harbor View dealership. We just found something under the floorboards of the car your father sold. A classified Navy document. You need to get down here. Now." I looked at my father, smiling smugly with the crystal flute in his hand. He had no idea he had just sold a national secret, and my war was just beginning. I stood there, frozen in my dress whites, staring at the man who used to be my father. Robert Lester didn't even flinch under my gaze. He just tilted the bottle, pouring the bubbling gold liquid into a long-stemmed crystal glass. The afternoon sun hit the liquid, making it sparkle, a stark contrast to the dark storm brewing inside me. "Sit down, Janae. Don't give me that funeral face," he said, his words slightly slurred from the midday drinking. "You should be happy for your brother. Kyle's fiancé comes from the family that owns the biggest hotel chain on the East Coast. I can't have my son picking up his bride in a rental. That rusty old thing of your grandfather's finally served a purpose for the family's future." Every word felt like a tactical strike. To him, 35 years of Grandpa's service, the bullet holes patched on the fender, the smell of sweat, blood, and old engine oil. It was all just capital. Just liquidity to buy face for a wedding that was more of a merger than a marriage. Before I could engage, the double doors swung open. Kyle burst in. He looked like a caricature of a Wall Street hopeful, wearing an Armani suit that looked a size too small, likely just pulled off the rack. He was shouting into his latest iPhone, grinning ear to ear. "Dad, the event planners said $150K covers the platinum package. We get the ice sculptures and the live jazz band." He hung up, finally noticing the woman in the naval uniform standing in the foyer. He paused, but there was no rush to hug his sister after an 18-month deployment. "Oh, hey sis, you're back? Did you hear the news? Dad took care of everything." He laughed, a sound that was innocent in its cruelty. "You don't need to chip in for the wedding gift. We know how it is. Navy pay isn't exactly buying beach houses, right?" He smiled, an oblivious, toothy grin. He didn't know where the money came from, or perhaps he didn't care. The innocence of greed is often more terrifying than the greed itself. "That was Grandpa's car," I said, my voice low, grinding out the words like gravel. "He promised it to me." My father slammed his champagne glass onto the mahogany coaster. The sharp clink echoed in the silent room. "Verbal promises don't hold up in probate court, Janae. I am the legal heir." He stood up, his face flushing red. "And what would you do with it? You're 42 years old, no husband, no kids. You spend your life hiding on warships with a bunch of men. Kyle is the one building a legacy. He's the one building a home. Don't be so damn selfish." The accusation pierced through my armor deeper than any shrapnel could. He hadn't just sold a car, he had invalidated my entire existence. In Robert Lester's world, a Navy commander with a chest full of ribbons was worth less than a useless son about to marry into money. The phone in my pocket was still warm from Daniels's call. I looked at the two men before me, my blood relatives, one old, one young, both rotting from the inside out with the cancer of materialism. I didn't scream. I didn't throw a vase. That's what a daughter would do. But I wasn't a daughter anymore. I was an officer assessing a hostile environment. I reached down and hoisted my duffel bag. The weight of it felt grounding, familiar. You're right, Dad, I said. My voice was ice cold, devoid of any familial warmth. I don't need a car to prove my value, but you. I looked him dead in the eye. You just sold the only thing that was protecting you from the judgment of your own conscience. Get out, he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at the door. Go back to your ships. I turned my back on them. I walked out the front door, leaving his curses hanging in the air-conditioned air of the foyer. I didn't cry. Soldiers don't cry when they are ambushed. We reload. We counterattack. I marched down the driveway, the gravel crunching under my polished shoes like bones breaking. General Patton's voice echoed in my mind, clear as a bell. If everyone is thinking alike, then somebody isn't thinking. I was definitely not thinking like a Lester today. If you believe Janae did the right thing by walking away from that toxicity, please hit the like button to show your support. And in the comments, just type the word justice if you are ready to see her fight back for her grandfather's honor. I raised my hand and hailed a passing yellow cab. As I slid into the back seat, the driver looked at me in the rearview mirror. Where to, Commander? Harborview Auto, I said, staring straight ahead. And step on it. Harborview Auto was less of a car dealership and more of a cathedral to excess. The showroom floor was paved with Italian marble that reflected the harsh, white glare of overhead neon lights. Sleek Ferraris and Porsches sat silently in rows, looking like pampered pets that had never seen a speck of real dirt. I walked through the glass doors, the dust of travel still clinging to my camouflage fatigues. I felt like an intrusion in this sterile world, a smudge on a perfect picture. A salesman in a sharp suit looked at me, frowned, and checked his watch. But before he could dismiss me, a side door swung open. Commander Lester? A man in a mechanic's jumpsuit, stained with honest grease and oil, hurried toward me. He was about 50, with the rough, calloused hands of someone who actually worked for a living. His name tag read, Daniels, Service Manager. Thank God you're here, he said, wiping his hands on a rag. His tone held a level of respect that my own father hadn't shown me in 20 years. We were prepping the car for shipping. The buyer in Dubai wanted a full respray. Candy apple red, if you can believe that. But my guys... They stopped working the moment they pulled up the carpets. He didn't wait for a response. He gestured for me to follow him, leading me away from the pristine showroom and into the back of the shop. The air here was different. It smelled of rubber, solvent, and old metal. And there she was. In the far corner, under a solitary hanging bulb, sat the 1968 Pontiac GTO. Daniels pulled the gray tarp off the car. My heart skipped a beat. The steel blue paint was duller than I remembered, covered in a layer of neglect. I walked around to the driver's side and peered through the window. My stomach turned. The leather of the driver's seat had been slashed open. A jagged cut, likely from a pocket knife. Your father, Daniels muttered, seeing my expression. He was digging for loose change before he handed over the keys. He said he didn't want to leave a single cent behind. I touched the cold hood of the car. It felt like touching my grandfather's hand. The metal was solid, unyielding. Show me, I said. Daniels opened the trunk. It was empty, stripped of the spare tire and the jack. He pointed to the floor of the trunk. We stripped the lining to check for rust, he whispered, his voice dropping as if he were afraid of being overheard. Look at the floor pan depth. We measured it against the GM factory specs for a 68G body. The floor here is raised exactly 2 inches higher than it should be. There's a false bottom, Commander. And it wasn't installed by a local body shop. My mind raced. A false bottom? Grandpa was a master chief, not a smuggler. Or so I thought. Wait, I said, a memory flickering in the back of my mind. The glove box. I moved to the front of the car and yanked the passenger door open. The smell hit me instantly. A mix of stale tobacco, old leather, and cedar wood. It was the scent of my childhood. I popped the latch of the glove box. Empty. Of course, Robert would have thrown away the maintenance logs. But I reached inside anyway, running my fingers along the top edge of the liner. There, hidden beneath the felt, was a small tear. I dug my finger in and felt something cold and metallic. I hooked it and pulled hard. A single dog tag slid out into my palm. The metal was worn smooth, but the embossed letters were still legible. Hayes, John W. USN. Wrapped tightly around the chain was a scrap of yellowed notebook paper. I unfolded it, my hands trembling. The handwriting was jagged, hurried. If you are reading this, the car has been sold. Call the girl. Don't let it fall into enemy hands. Tears pricked my eyes. He knew, I whispered. Grandpa knew that one day his own son would betray him. He had planted this failsafe for me. Commander, Daniels called out from the back. You need to see the fasteners. I walked back to the trunk. Daniels shone a flashlight onto the four corners of the false floor. I've been a mechanic for 30 years, Daniels said. I've never seen screws like this on a civilian vehicle. 5-point star heads with a center pin. Standard screwdrivers won't touch them. These are military-grade ordnance screws from the 60s. I stared at the strange star-shaped screw head. My hand instinctively went to my neck. Hidden under my undershirt, against my skin, I wore a necklace. It wasn't jewelry. It was a tarnished brass key with a cross-shaped handle and a strange, 5-pointed tip. Grandpa had given it to me on his deathbed. His breathing shallow, his grip iron tight on my wrist. Keep it close, Jenny. Never take it off. One day you'll find the lock that fits. I had worn it for 5 years, thinking it was just a sentimental keepsake. I unclasped the chain and pulled the necklace free. The brass felt heavy in my hand. Step back, I told Daniels. I leaned over the trunk. I positioned the tip of the strange key over the first screw head. I held my breath. It slotted in. Perfect. I applied pressure and turned. Click. The sound was sharp and mechanical, echoing through the silent garage. It wasn't just the sound of a screw turning. It was the sound of a lock opening on a history that had been buried for half a century. Holy hell, Daniels breathed. Get the other 3, I ordered, my voice steady, though my pulse was hammering against my collarbone. We are opening this up. The noise of the impact wrench had died down, leaving the garage in a heavy, expectant silence. The only sound was the agonizing screech, screech, screech of metal against metal as I manually turned the final screw. It had been rusted in place for half a century, fighting me every millimeter of the way. Daniel stood over my shoulder, holding a heavy maglite steady, though I could hear his breathing catch in his throat. With one final grunt of effort, the tension released. The screw fell onto the concrete floor with a hollow ping. Immediately, a hidden spring mechanism engaged. The false floor panel of the trunk popped up with a soft hiss, releasing a pocket of air that had been trapped since the Nixon administration. A chill ran over my hands, a spectral coldness rising from the dark recess of the chassis. Nestled snugly inside a custom-cut bed of shock-absorbent foam lay a box. It wasn't just a container, it was a piece of craftsmanship. It was made of black oak, polished to a deep shine that had barely faded in the darkness. On the lid, hand-carved and filled with gold leaf, were 3 initials and a single word. JWH. Honor. It wasn't the stash of gold bars or stacks of cash my father might have dreamed of finding. It was something far heavier. I reached down, my hands trembling slightly, and lifted the box. It had a density to it, a gravitational pull. I set it gently on the edge of the trunk and undid the brass latch. Inside, the contents were arranged with a military precision that made my chest ache. On the left, secured in a velvet mold, was a Colt M1911 pistol. The steel was gunmetal gray, cold, and lethal. I checked the chamber out of habit, empty. The firing pin had been removed. It wasn't a weapon anymore, it was a symbol. Next to it sat a thick manila folder stamped with red ink. Department of the Navy, restricted. But what caught my eye weren't the classified files. It was the stack of envelopes on the right. There were dozens of them, all opened, their edges worn soft from being read and reread. The handwriting on them varied, some shaky, some bold, all different. I picked up the top letter. The paper was thin, cheap notebook paper from the 70s. Dear Master Chief Hayes, I read aloud, my voice barely a whisper in the cavernous garage. Thank you for the run last night. The insulin you brought saved my daughter's life. The VA turned us away, but you didn't. God bless you. The date was November 12th, 1978. I frowned. Grandpa had retired in 75. He was supposed to be playing golf and fixing porches. So what was he doing making runs with medical supplies 3 years later? I dug deeper into the box. At the very bottom, beneath the stack of gratitude, lay a single navy blue envelope. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. It was sharp, angular, and strong. To Commander Janae Lester, future. He had written this when I was just a child, yet he had addressed me by the rank I hold today. He knew. He always knew. I broke the wax seal. The scent of old parchment mixed with the faint, sweet smell of pipe tobacco wafted up, hitting me with a wave of nostalgia so potent it nearly knocked me over. Janae, my calm in the storm, the letter began. If you are reading this, it means someone has forgotten what matters. This car, this 68 GTO, it never belonged to me. And it certainly doesn't belong to your father. It belongs to Project Lifeline. When the war ended, the country wanted to forget about us. They left good men behind to rot in poverty and sickness. I couldn't stand by. I used this car to carry hope, medicine, food, sometimes just a listening ear, to the brothers the system abandoned. I wiped a tear that had escaped down my cheek. Honor isn't a medal you wear on your chest, kiddo. Honor is what you do when nobody is looking. This car isn't property. It's a vessel. Don't let them sell it for parts. At the bottom of the page, he had scrawled a verse he used to recite to me on the porch swing. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. I looked back into the box. Tucked in the corner was a first-generation USB drive, bulky and gray, and a folded map of the East Coast, marked with hundreds of red dots stretching from Virginia to Florida. My God, Daniels whispered. He was looking at the contents of the box with wide eyes. Your father sold this car for a wedding reception, but the history in this trunk is priceless. He pointed to a small velvet pouch next to the gun. Are those? I nodded. I didn't need to open it to know. His service medals. He hadn't lost them. He had hidden them here, with the work that actually mattered to him. I carefully placed the letter back into the envelope. I closed the lid of the oak box. Clack. The sound was decisive. It sounded like a bolt sliding home in a rifle. The sadness that had been crushing my lungs evaporated. In its place, a cold, hard resolve began to burn. It was the feeling I got before a deployment. The mission was clear. Daniels, I said, turning to the mechanic. My voice was no longer shaking. It was the voice of a commander giving an order on the bridge. Keep this car here, guard it with your life. Do not let anyone from the shipping company touch it. What are you going to do? Daniels asked, clutching the rag in his hands. I picked up the box and tucked it firmly under my arm. I'm going to the naval base, I said, staring at the GTO one last time. I'm going to prove that my father doesn't have the title to this vehicle. This isn't a civilian muscle car, Daniels. This is a mobile military command post involved in classified operations. I turned toward the exit, the gravel crunching beneath my boots. And I'm about to declare war. I had the box tucked tight under my arm, my hand already reaching for the door handle of the service bay, when a shadow blocked my path. It wasn't a mechanic. It was a man in a charcoal gray suit that cost more than my monthly base pay. He had slicked back hair and the dead predatory eyes of a reef shark. Commander Lester, he said, his voice smooth and dangerously polite. I'm afraid you can't take that. I stopped, my muscles tensing. This is my grandfather's personal property. It has nothing to do with the vehicle sale. The lawyer smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He produced a crisp, stapled document from a leather folio. Actually, it has everything to do with it. Your father, Mr. Robert Lester, signed a comprehensive as-is transfer of ownership. Clause 14, Section B clearly states that the sale includes the chassis, engine, and any and all contents contained within the vehicle frame at the time of inspection. He tapped the paper with a manicured finger. Technically, that box is now the property of a private collector in Dubai. If you walk out that door with it, my firm will have the local PD arrest you for grand larceny before you reach the interstate. A felony charge wouldn't look good on a naval officer's record, would it? Daniel stood behind him, looking pale and helpless. He shook his head slightly. The law was a weapon. And right now, it was pointed directly at my head. My grip tightened on the oak box until my knuckles turned white. I could fight a physical enemy. I could fight the sea. But I couldn't fight a contract signed in bad faith. I pulled my phone out with my free hand and hit speed dial. Dad! It rang 3 times before he picked up. The background noise wasn't the silence of a guilty conscience. It was the clinking of fine china and the soft swell of a string quartet. He was at the pre-wedding tea at the country club. "Make it quick, Jenny," Robert said, his voice cheerful and loud, performing for an audience. "We're just about to toast the bride's parents." "You didn't just sell the car," I hissed, turning my back to the lawyer. "You sold Grandpa's legacy. We found a box under the floorboards, his medals, his letters, a gun. You signed away his life for a check." There was a pause on the line. I expected shame. I expected shock. Instead, Robert laughed. It was a dry, dismissive sound. "Oh, stop the melodrama, Janae. It's pathetic." His tone dropped, becoming venomous. "Is that what this is about? You're making up stories about hidden treasures because you can't stand it, can you?" "Can't stand what?" I asked, bewildered. "You can't stand seeing Kyle happy," he spat. "You're jealous. You look at him, young, successful, marrying into the Hilton tier of society. And then you look at yourself. 42, living in a bunk on a gray ship, with nothing to keep you warm at night but a few participation ribbons and a sense of self-righteousness. You're trying to sabotage his wedding because you're miserable." The air left my lungs. It was gaslighting of the highest order. He wasn't just denying the truth, he was rewriting reality to make me the villain in his narrative. "Dad, listen to me. There are classified documents in here." "I don't care if there's the Declaration of Independence in there," Robert shouted, abandoning his public persona. "Listen to me closely. The buyer wired a $50,000 non-refundable deposit this morning. That money is already in the caterer's account. If you blow this deal, I have to pay it back double. And do you know where that money will come from?" I stayed silent, a cold dread pooling in my stomach. "I'll sell the house," he threatened. "The old farmhouse, Mom's garden, your room, all of it. I will liquidate every single memory you have left to pay for your brother's future if you don't back off. Do you want Grandpa to lose his car and his home? Test me, Janae." The line went dead. I lowered the phone. My hand was shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so pure it felt like liquid nitrogen in my veins. He was holding my childhood hostage. He would scorch the earth just to save face. I looked at the lawyer. He was checking his watch, bored. "Well, Commander," the lawyer asked, "the box stays or the police come. Your choice." I closed my eyes for a second. In the tactical world, when you are outgunned and outmaneuvered, you don't charge into machine gun fire. You retreat, you regroup, and you find a different angle of attack. "You win," I said, my voice flat. I walked back to the trunk of the GTO. I placed the black oak box back into its foam cradle. "Smart choice," the lawyer smirked. But as I leaned over the trunk, blocking their view with my body, my hand moved with the speed of a magician. I slipped the thin manila folder containing the restricted file and the bulky gray USB drive out of the box. In one fluid motion, I slid them into the inner breast pocket of my dress jacket. It was seamless. I closed the lid of the box. Clack. I stood up and faced them. I was empty-handed, but I felt heavier. "I'm leaving the box," I said, stepping up to the lawyer until I was invading his personal space. I saw his smirk falter. "But you listen to me, and you listen good. You represent the buyer, which means you are now responsible for this vehicle." I turned to Daniels, making sure he heard this too. "If this car leaves this lot before I return, you won't be dealing with my personal attorney. You will be hearing from the federal military court. Transporting stolen Department of Defense property across state lines is a federal crime, counselor, and ignorance of the cargo is not a defense." I didn't wait for his rebuttal. I spun on my heel and marched out of the service bay. I slammed the heavy steel door behind me, the sound echoing like a gunshot, leaving them standing in the silence of their own greed. I had lost the battle for the car, but I had secured the intelligence. Now, I just needed to decode it. I drove the rental sedan like I was qualifying for a NASCAR race, weaving through the heavy afternoon traffic on I-64. My destination was Naval Station Norfolk, the largest naval base in the world and the only place on Earth where I felt truly understood. At the main gate, the master-at-arms scanned my ID. The familiar beep and his sharp salute grounded me. Behind those fences lay rows of gray destroyers and carriers, massive, lethal, and honest. Unlike the suburbs I had just left, nothing here was pretending to be something it wasn't. 10 minutes later, I was in the sterile, fluorescent-lit office of Lieutenant Grace Miller. Grace was a rising star in the Judge Advocate General's Corps, JAG. She was 30 years old, sharp as a tack, with hair pulled back in a bun so tight it looked painful. She was the only person in legal who didn't look at me like a dinosaur for valuing tradition. "Commander," she said, eyeing the bulky gray USB drive I had placed on her desk like it was a live grenade. "You know the regulations on unverified peripherals. If I plug that into the network, Cyber Command will have a SWAT team here in 5 minutes." "It's not from a foreign actor, Grace," I said, my voice low. "It's from Master Chief John Hayes." Grace paused. In the Norfolk Navy community, the name Hayes was something of a quiet legend. He was the kind of NCO who trained admirals when they were just ensigns. "The Master Chief?" she asked, her demeanor softening. "He left this for me. I need to know what's on it, off the grid." Grace sighed, but she stood up and walked to a standalone terminal in the corner, an air-gapped machine used for analyzing quarantined data. She plugged the drive in. The screen didn't load a modern Windows interface. Instead, it flickered, and a black box appeared with blinking green ASCII text. It looked like something out of a Cold War movie. "Project Lifeline, Eyes-Only Authentication. Hayes, J.W." "What in the world?" Grace muttered, typing in a command line. Files began to unspool on the screen. It wasn't a weapon blueprint or a spy roster. It was a logbook. Hundreds of entries dating from 1975 to 1985. "It's a ghost fleet," I whispered, realizing what I was looking at. "Project Lifeline," Grace read aloud, scanning the summary. It wasn't an official combat operation. It was a black-budget humanitarian network. She looked up at me, eyes wide. "Janae, look at this." After Vietnam, when the vets came home, a lot of them didn't trust the VA hospitals. They were sick, addicted, or wounded. And they were hiding in the backwoods of Virginia and the Carolinas. The government forgot them. But Grandpa didn't, I finished for her. The logs detailed midnight runs, deliveries of penicillin, morphine, food rations, and even transport for underground doctors to treat veterans who had fallen through the cracks of society. And the primary transport vehicle listed for the Mid-Atlantic region was a high-speed interceptor. "The GTO," Grace said, pointing to a scanned PDF file. "Look at the procurement invoice." She opened the file. It was a faded, grainy scan of a bill of sale from 1968. But the buyer field didn't say John Hayes. It read, "Department of the Navy, Emergency Relief Fund, Special Assets Division. Authorized, Custodian, Master Chief J.W. Hayes. Status, Indefinite Deployment." Grace spun her chair around, a triumphant grin breaking her professional mask. "There it is, the smoking gun. Your father didn't inherit that car because your grandfather never legally owned it. He was the custodian. That vehicle was purchased with Navy black funds for covert domestic support. Technically, it is still active government property that was never decommissioned." My heart hammered against my ribs. "So, Robert's selling it is theft of government property," Grace finished, "and trafficking in stolen military assets. We can shut this sale down. We can impound the car." "Print it," I ordered. "Wait," Grace said, her smile fading as she looked at the date stamps. "Janae, hold on. This invoice is over 50 years old. The emergency relief fund that bought it was dissolved in the 90s. If we take this to a civilian judge tomorrow to stop the wedding money, your father's lawyers will argue it's a clerical error or that the car was gifted upon retirement. They'll tie this up in probate for years. The car will be in Dubai before we get a court order. I felt the air leave the room. I don't have years. I have less than 24 hours. We need corroboration, Grace said, typing furiously. We need a living witness. Someone who can stand in front of a judge or a police officer and testify that this car was used for official duty under Project Lifeline, not just grocery runs. She pulled up the personnel roster associated with the project. Next to most names, there was a red, deceased tag. It was a generation that was dying out. Dead. 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 Grace scrolled down. Then her finger stopped. Here, she said. Lieutenant Robert Thompson. He was listed as a field medic who rode shotgun on the runs between 78 and 80. I leaned in. The status next to his name was inactive, living. Where is he? I asked. Grace clicked on the profile. Last known address updated by his pension fund 6 months ago. He's in a brooding little coastal town called Clearwater Shores. I checked the map in my head. Clearwater Shores was a forgotten fishing village about 40 minutes north of here. He's alive, I said, grabbing the printout of the invoice. And he's close. Janae, Grace warned, if this guy is a ghost, he might not want to be found. And he certainly might not want to talk about off-book operations from 40 years ago. I buttoned my dress jacket and adjusted my cover. He's a sailor, Grace, and we don't leave our own behind. If that car saved his brothers, he'll talk. I turned to leave. I had the paper trail. Now I just needed the voice of history to make it scream. Clearwater Shores was a town that time had seemingly forgotten. The houses were weathered gray by the salt air, and the fishing nets hung drying on porches like old spider webs. I pulled the rental car up to the address Grace had given me. It was a small single-story bungalow that had seen better days. The white paint was peeling in long strips, revealing the gray wood underneath, and the roof sagged slightly in the middle. But there was one thing about the property that was immaculate. Right by the front door, flying from a freshly painted pole, was the American flag. It wasn't tattered or faded. It was crisp, bright, and ironed flat, snapping proudly in the ocean breeze. In the small yard, an elderly African-American man sat in a wheelchair, carefully watering a bed of marigolds with a garden hose. One of his pant legs was pinned up just below the knee. I stepped out of the car, adjusting my uniform. The gravel crunched under my boots, and the sound made him look up. He squinted against the dying afternoon sun, his eyes scanning me from my polished shoes to the ribbons on my chest. Finally, his gaze locked onto the black name tag. Lester. He turned off the hose nozzle. The silence between us was heavy with the sound of distant seagulls. You have his eyes, he said. His voice was raspy, like sandpaper over wood. Steely blue, just like the car. I walked closer, stopping at the edge of the flower bed. Lieutenant Thompson. He smiled, a slow expression that creased the deep lines of his face. I haven't been a lieutenant in 40 years, ma'am. Just Bob. And you? You must be little Janae. I remember you sitting in the passenger seat of that GTO, crumbs all over your face, eating those shortbread cookies John kept in the glove box. A lump formed in my throat. I hadn't thought about those cookies in decades. I need your help, Bob, I said softly. It's about the car. My father? He sold it. Bob's smile faded instantly. He gestured for me to sit on the wooden steps of his porch. I sat down, not caring about the dust on my dress whites. Let me tell you something about that car, Bob said, looking past me, staring at a horizon only he could see. It wasn't just a machine, it was an arc. He wheeled himself closer, his hands gripping the rubber tires. Winter of 1975, he began. I had just come home. I lost my leg in Da Nang. My wife couldn't handle the nightmares, so she left. I couldn't hold down a job. The VA checks were late, and the bottle was empty. I was sitting right there in that living room, freezing because the heat had been cut off. He tapped his chest. I had my service pistol on the table. 1 round in the chamber. I was ready to check out, Commander. I was done. I watched a tear trace a path through the weathered map of his cheek. Then I heard it, he whispered. That low rumble, that V8 growl. Your grandfather pulled that GTO right onto my lawn, churning up the snow. He didn't knock. He kicked the door open. He took one look at the gun, then one look at me. He didn't offer me pity. He didn't offer me a sermon. Bob chuckled, a wet sound. He grabbed me by the collar and dragged me out to the car. He threw me in the back seat. He drove all night, through a blizzard, to the VA hospital in D.C. He sat by my bed for 3 days until I was stable. He paid my overdue bills with his own pension check. I listened, visualizing my stern, quiet grandfather doing this. This was the man my father called selfish. Bob reached into the breast pocket of his flannel shirt. He pulled out a small bundle, wrapped in a pristine white handkerchief. With trembling fingers, he unfolded the cloth. Inside lay a Navy cross. The bronze medal caught the last rays of the sun. It was the second highest award for valor a sailor could receive. A few years later, I fell on hard times again, Bob said, running his thumb over the medal. I pawned this. I sold my honor for rent money. I was ashamed. He looked me dead in the eye. John found out. He went to the pawn shop and bought it back. He drove it down here and put it in my hand. He looked at me and said, Bob, you can sell your house, you can sell your car, but you never, ever sell your honor. That's the only thing you take with you when you go. The words hung in the air, vibrating with truth. My father was doing the exact opposite. He was selling honor to buy a house, or at least to save one. He was trading the eternal for the temporary. Bob wrapped the medal back up with the care of a mother swaddling an infant. He reached out and took my hand. His grip was surprisingly strong. That car is a holy vessel, Commander, he said intensely. It carried men who were broken and made them whole again. It carried hope when the government only sent paperwork. You can't let it become a trophy for some rich man who doesn't know the cost of freedom. I stood up. The doubt that had been nagging at me, the fear that I was being unreasonable, that I was just a bitter, lonely daughter, vanished completely. I wasn't fighting for a car, I was fighting for Bob. I was fighting for the thousands of miles that GTO had driven to save lives. I placed my hand on Bob's shoulder. I swear to you, Bob, I said, my voice steady and fierce. That car isn't going anywhere. Tomorrow is my brother's wedding, and I'm going to crash it. I'm going to get that car back, not with money, but with the truth. Bob nodded, leaning back in his chair. Give him hell, Commander. I turned and walked back to my car as the sun dipped below the ocean, painting the sky in streaks of blood orange and violet. Tomorrow, there would be champagne, flowers, and expensive suits. And I would be bringing the storm. I pulled my rental car into the long, winding driveway of the Lester estate. The house was blazing with light, every window glowing against the night sky like a cruise ship in the middle of a dark ocean. Inside, the atmosphere was frantic. The rehearsal dinner had apparently moved back to the house. Caterers were rushing through the hallway with trays of hors d'oeuvres, and the smell of expensive lilies, so overpowering it almost smelled like a funeral parlor, choked the air. In the center of the living room, Kyle was standing on a footstool while a tailor made last-minute adjustments to his tuxedo. He looked like a prince being prepped for his coronation. Careful with the inseam. Kyle laughed, holding a glass of scotch. My father, Robert, was directing a florist on where to place a massive archway of white roses. When the front door clicked shut behind me, he turned. The smile dropped from his face instantly. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet 10 degrees. Everyone out, Robert said. His voice wasn't loud, but it was absolute. But Dad, the tailor isn't done, Kyle started. I said out, Robert roared, his face flushing a dangerous shade of crimson. The staff scrambled. Kyle gave me a confused, annoyed look, hopped off the stool, and scurried into the kitchen. Robert marched over to the double doors and slammed them shut, sealing us in. He turned to me, his hands balling into fists at his sides. The lawyer from Harborview called me, he hissed through clenched teeth. You threatened them with a federal court-martial? Are you out of your mind, Jenny? I didn't threaten anyone, I said calmly, standing at parade rest by the door. I just informed them of the legal consequences of trafficking stolen military property. Stolen? Robert stepped closer, invading my personal space. The smell of expensive cologne and stale wine was thick on his breath. That car is mine. I am the head of this family. I decide what gets sold and what gets kept. Not anymore, I replied. Robert stared at me, his eyes narrowing. Then a cruel, ugly smirk twisted his lips. You know what this is really about, he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. It's not about Grandpa. It's not about honor. It's about you being jealous. He pointed a shaking finger at my face. Look at your brother. He's 35, he's vibrant, he's successful. Tomorrow he marries a beautiful woman from one of the best families in Virginia. He's building a dynasty. He took a step back, looking me up and down with undisguised disgust. And then look at you. 42 years old, dried up, no husband, no children, no legacy. You spend your life on those gray ships taking orders because you have no life here. You're terrified, Janae. You're terrified that tomorrow, when Kyle says I do, everyone will see you for what you really are. A sad, lonely spinster with nothing to keep her warm at night but a few useless medals. The words hit me like acid. He wasn't just attacking my actions. He was trying to dismantle my soul. He was using my service, my sacrifice, and my independence as weapons to shame me. I didn't blink. I didn't look away. I looked at him with a profound, quiet pity. And that silence drove him over the edge. Listen to me, he snarled, leaning in until his face was inches from mine. If you dare show your face at the ceremony tomorrow, if you make a scene, I swear to God, I will disown you. He let that sink in. I will call the attorneys on Monday morning and have you scrubbed from the will. I will remove your name from the family tree. You will not be a Lester anymore. You will act like a stranger, and you will die alone, with no family to bury you. My heart cracked. Not because I was afraid of his threat, but because I realized the man standing in front of me was already dead. The father I had wanted to please as a child was gone, replaced by this monster of ego and greed. I stepped around him, walking toward the staircase. Dad, I said, pausing with my hand on the banister. I didn't turn back to look at him. You wrote me out of this family a long time ago. You did it the moment you chose a check over your own father's honor. Don't you walk away from me, he screamed. I'll be there tomorrow, I said, my voice echoing in the large foyer. Not to ruin your party, but to return the truth to this house. I walked up the stairs, leaving his shouting behind me. I entered the guest room, my old room, and locked the door. My hands were shaking slightly, but my mind was clear. I walked to the closet and pulled off the plastic cover. Hanging there was my dress white uniform. The fabric was pristine, sharp, and commanding. The gold stripes on the shoulder boards caught the light. It wasn't just clothing, it was armor. If you think Robert went too far by threatening to disown his own daughter for protecting her grandfather's legacy, hit that like button right now. And tell me in the comments, would you show up to that wedding if you were Janae? Type yes if you would stand and fight. I reached out and touched the fabric. Tomorrow I wasn't going to be the daughter. I wasn't going to be the sister. I was going to be the commander. And I was going to war. The grand ballroom of the Chesapeake Bay Yacht Club was a vision of excessive opulence. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the harbor, where million-dollar vessels bobbed gently in the twilight. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of imported white orchids, thousands of them, cascading from the ceiling like a floral waterfall. My father, Robert, stood at the podium, bathed in the warm glow of the spotlight. He looked every inch the benevolent patriarch in his custom tuxedo, holding a glass of 1982 Bordeaux aloft. To my son, Kyle, Robert beamed, his voice amplified by the sound system. And to his beautiful bride, Sarah. The Lester family has always valued tradition. We value legacy. And to honor this union, I am proud to gift the happy couple a check for $150,000, a small nest egg to start their dynasty. Applause rippled through the room. The guests, senators, CEOs, and local socialites nodded in approval. At the head table, Sarah's father, a silver-haired man with a spine as stiff as a steel rod, clapped politely. He was a retired Air Force colonel, a man I'd always respected from a distance. Robert soaked in the adulation, unaware that the ground beneath him was about to crumble. At the back of the room, the double mahogany doors swung open with a heavy thud. The chatter didn't die down instantly. It rippled away like a receding wave as heads turned. I stepped into the ballroom. I wasn't wearing the dusty fatigues of a traveler anymore. I was wearing my service dress whites. The high collar, the choker, was stiff and pristine. My white gloves were spotless. On my left chest, rows of colorful ribbons told the story of 20 years of service, of deployments to the Gulf and the Pacific. But the most commanding object wasn't my uniform. It was the black oak box I carried in my hands, held out in front of me like an offering, or a weapon. The string quartet trailed off into a discordant silence. The only sound was the rhythmic clack, clack, clack of my dress shoes on the parquet floor as I marched down the center aisle. Robert froze mid-sip. His eyes bulged. He looked like he was seeing a ghost. "Janae," he whispered into the hot mic, the sound screeching slightly through the speakers. "Security? Someone get security." Two young men in blazers started to move toward me, but I didn't break stride. I shot them a look, the commander's glare that could freeze a chaotic bridge during a storm. They stopped dead in their tracks. I reached the stage. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I simply walked up the stairs and stood next to my father. I placed the black box on the podium, right next to his wine glass. I reached over and took the microphone from his limp hand. "I apologize for the interruption," I said. My voice was calm, projecting with the authority of someone used to giving orders over the roar of jet engines. "But there is a correction that needs to be made to the record." I looked out at the sea of stunned faces. The $150,000 my father just pledged to this wedding is not his to give. It is blood money. A collective gasp went through the room. Robert grabbed my arm. "You are drunk. You are insane. Get off this stage." I shook him off with a sharp, disciplined movement. I flipped the latch of the oak box and threw the lid open. "This money came from the illegal sale of a 1968 Pontiac GTO, I continued, reaching into the box. I pulled out the manila folder stamped restricted and held it up. But that car was not a civilian vehicle. It was a mobile asset of Project Lifeline. It belongs to the Department of the Navy. Then I reached into the box again. I pulled out the Navy Cross. The bronze cross suspended from its blue and white ribbon caught the spotlight. It glittered with a somber, holy light. "And this," I said, my voice catching just slightly, "is the Navy Cross, the second highest award for valor in combat. My grandfather, Master Chief John Hayes, redeemed this medal from a pawn shop to save a brother in arms. He taught us that honor is not for sale." I turned to Robert. He was pale, sweating profusely under the stage lights. "You sold a national secret to pay for a party, Dad. You sold your father's honor for applause, but the Navy is taking it back." Robert looked around wildly, seeking an ally. "She's lying. She's jealous. Someone get her out of here." Nobody moved. The silence was deafening. Then, at the head table, a chair scraped against the floor. Sarah's father, the retired Air Force colonel, stood up. He walked slowly toward the stage. Robert breathed a sigh of relief, thinking he was about to be rescued. "Colonel," Robert stammered, "I am so sorry. My daughter is mentally unstable." The colonel walked right past Robert as if he didn't exist. He stopped in front of me. He looked at the Navy Cross in my hand, then up at the ribbons on my chest. His eyes were wet. He snapped his heels together. He straightened his back, and then, slowly, deliberately, he raised his right hand to his brow in a perfect, crisp salute. "Commander," the colonel said, his voice thick with emotion, "thank you for protecting the line." It was the spark that ignited the powder keg. Across the room, chairs scraped back. One by one, men and women stood up. Some were old, leaning on canes. Some were young. They were veterans. They recognized the uniform. They recognized the sacrifice. They stood and saluted. It was a wall of silence, a wall of respect that isolated Robert completely. He stood there, alone on his stage, surrounded by his expensive flowers and his stolen money, utterly naked in the eyes of his peers. He looked at the colonel. He looked at me. He looked at the crowd. His hand shook violently. The vintage Bordeaux glass slipped from his fingers. Smash! The sound of shattering crystal echoed through the ballroom, marking the end of his charade. The red wine pooled on the white stage like a gunshot wound. Robert Lester didn't just lose an argument, he had lost his place in the world. The wedding of the season didn't end with a toast or a shower of rice. It ended with the screech of tires and the slamming of limousine doors. From the steps of the yacht club, I watched the taillights of the colonel's town car fade into the night. He had taken his daughter and left. The merger was off. Down in the parking lot, my brother Kyle was pathetic. He was running after the car in his bespoke tuxedo, shouting Sarah's name, his voice cracking with desperation. But the car didn't stop. He was left standing alone on the asphalt, a prince without a kingdom. I turned away and walked toward the far end of the lot. Under the yellow glow of a street lamp, the 1968 Pontiac GTO sat waiting. Daniels was leaning against the fender, arms crossed. When he saw me, he simply nodded, tossed me the keys, and walked away to his own truck. He knew his job was done. I heard heavy, dragging footsteps behind me. Robert Lester emerged from the shadows. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in the span of an hour. His bow tie was undone, hanging loosely around his neck like a noose. The arrogance that usually held his spine straight had evaporated, leaving him slumped and defeated. He stopped a few feet away, looking at the car. He didn't look at me. "Janae." His voice was brittle, trembling. I'm sorry. I was wrong." I turned slowly, keys jingling in my hand. I didn't offer him a comforting smile. I didn't rush to hug him. That would have been a lie, and we were done with lies. "You're not sorry, Dad," I said, my voice calm but unyielding. "You're just sorry you got caught. You're sorry that the colonel saw who you really are, and you're sorry that you lost face in front of the country club set." He flinched as if I had struck him. He opened his mouth to argue, but closed it again. He knew I was right. "You spent your whole life chasing things that rust and rot," I continued, stepping closer. "You wanted the prestige, the connections, the money. And look where it got you. You have no money. Your honor is in tatters, and you just watched your son beg for a life he didn't earn." Robert looked down at his polished shoes. A single tear tracked through the sweat on his forehead. "I just wanted to secure the future." "You don't secure a future by selling the past," I said. I unlocked the passenger door of the GTO. "Get in," I ordered. "I'm taking you home." Robert hesitated, looking at the old bucket seat with a strange mix of fear and reverence. Then, slowly, he lowered himself into the car. I slid into the driver's seat. It felt like coming home. The smell of the cabin, gasoline, vinyl, and cedar was a sanctuary. I turned the key. The 400 cubic inch V8 engine roared to life. It wasn't a polite, modern hum. It was a deep, guttural growl that vibrated through the chassis and straight into your bones. It was the heartbeat of a different era. The drive back to the estate was silent. I didn't turn on the radio. The only sound was the engine and the wind rushing past the open windows. I glanced over at Robert. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't scheming. He was running his hand along the dashboard, his fingers tracing the cracks in the vinyl. He looked at the glove box where the letters had been hidden for 40 years. "He drove me to baseball practice in this car," Robert whispered, his voice barely audible over the engine. "I forgot what it smelled like. I forgot him." "He never forgot you," I said, eyes on the road. "Even when you disappointed him, he kept the car. He kept the memories. You were the one who tried to erase them." Robert slumped back against the seat, closing his eyes. For the first time in my life, he looked small. He wasn't the titan of industry or the domineering father. He was just a lonely old man riding in his dead father's car. I pulled into the driveway of the estate. The house was dark now. The caterers had packed up and left. The grand archway of white roses looked ghostly in the moonlight. I cut the engine. The silence that followed was heavy. "So," Robert said, not moving to get out. "What happens now? The buyer? The deposit?" "The car is leaving tonight," I said firmly. "I've already arranged it with Daniels. It's being transported to the National Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola. They have a wing dedicated to logistics and support operations. It will be preserved as a historical artifact of Project Lifeline." Robert nodded slowly. "And the $50,000. I don't have the liquidity to pay it back, Janae. You know that." He looked at me, a flicker of the old expectation in his eyes. The expectation that I would fix his mess, that I would bail him out like a good daughter. I looked him dead in the eye. "Then you better start selling," I said. "Selling what?" "Your wine collection," I replied. "The vintage Bordeaux, the Napa cabs. You have at least $60,000 worth of wine in that cellar collecting dust. Liquidate it, pay the buyer back." "But that collection took me 20 years to build," he stammered. "And it took Grandpa 30 years to build his reputation," I countered. "You were willing to sell his legacy for a party. Now you can sell your hobby to pay for your mistake." I leaned across and opened his door. "I'm not saving you this time, Dad. That's the price of honor. You have to pay your own way." Robert stared at me. For a second, I thought he would explode. But then, his shoulders dropped. He looked at the house, his big, empty, expensive house, and then back at me. He saw the resolve in my eyes, the same resolve his father had possessed. "You really are his granddaughter," he murmured. He stepped out of the car. He stood on the gravel, his tuxedo jacket hanging off one shoulder, looking like a shipwreck survivor washing up on a deserted island. "Goodbye, Dad," I said. I didn't wait for a response. I turned the key. The GTO roared back to life, loud and defiant. I threw it into reverse, spun the wheel, and drove back down the long driveway. I watched him in the rearview mirror until he was just a small dark speck against the white pillars of his mansion. I felt a weight lift off my chest. I had lost a father, perhaps, but for the first time in my life, I was free. 2 months later. The grand atrium of the National Naval Heritage Museum was quiet, save for the reverent footsteps of visitors and the soft hum of the climate control system. I stood on the mezzanine level, looking down at the newest exhibit in the logistics and support wing. There she was, the 1968 Pontiac GTO. She wasn't covered in dust or hidden under a tarp anymore. She was resting on a slowly rotating turntable, bathed in the warm glow of spotlights. The steel blue paint had been professionally restored, gleaming like the hull of a brand new destroyer. She looked powerful. She looked dignified. She looked exactly like she did when my grandfather drove her off the lot 50 years ago. A velvet rope separated the car from the public, and right in front of the bumper stood a polished bronze plaque. I knew the words by heart, but I read them again, just to feel the weight of them. Project Lifeline, Relief Vehicle, 1975-1985, donated by Master Chief John W. Hayes and Commander Janaea Lester. Dedicated to the unsung heroes who leave no one behind. I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned to see Bob Thompson. He was wearing a suit that was slightly out of style but pressed to perfection. On his lapel, the Navy Cross gleamed. He wasn't in his wheelchair today. He was standing, leaning heavily on a cane, but standing nonetheless. He would have hated all this fuss, Bob chuckled, his voice raspy and warm. John liked to operate in the shadows. Maybe, I smiled, but he deserved the spotlight. Next to Bob stood Grace Miller, who had traded her uniform for a sharp civilian blazer, and Daniels. The mechanic looked uncomfortable in a tie, pulling at his collar, but his eyes were shining with pride as he watched the car, his handiwork, rotate for the crowd. I looked at them. An old field medic, a young JAG lawyer, and a grease-stained mechanic. We shared no blood. We shared no last name. But as we stood there guarding the memory of a man who saved lives, I realized the truth. This was my family. They were the people who understood that value isn't printed on a bank statement. It is etched in your actions, My father wasn't here. Robert was currently 300 miles away, in the middle of a chaotic move. He had listed the estate for sale the week after the wedding imploded. He was downsizing to a 2-bedroom condo in the city. He was selling the wine collection, the country club membership, and the facade he had spent decades maintaining. We spoke briefly on the phone yesterday. He sounded tired, but lighter. He was learning how to cook for himself. He was learning how to live within his means. It was a harsh punishment, yes, but it was also a second chance. For the first time, Robert Lester was building a life based on reality, not debt. "Commander," Grace asked gently, "the director wants to take a photo for the newsletter." "In a minute," I said. I reached into the breast pocket of my uniform. My fingers brushed against two things. The first was the cold metal of my grandfather's dog tag. The second was a small folded scrap of paper. I hadn't found it in the black box. I'd found it the day we shipped the car, tucked deep inside the vintage chrome ashtray in the dashboard. A place my father never looked because he hated smoking. I pulled it out and unfolded it one last time. The ink was faded, but the message was clear. "Janae, you are my greatest pride. The car is just metal and rubber. You are the engine. Keep driving. Don't stop." I took a deep breath, fighting back the sting of happy tears. For so long, I thought I needed the car to prove I was his granddaughter. I thought I needed it to validate my existence against my father's judgment. But Grandpa knew better. He knew the car was just a vessel. The compass wasn't in the dashboard. It was in my chest. I folded the note and tucked it back over my heart. "I'm ready," I told my family. We took the photo. We shook hands with the museum staff. We said our goodbyes to the GTO, leaving her to tell her story to the next generation. I walked out of the museum's heavy glass doors and into the bright, blinding afternoon sun of Pensacola. The air smelled of salt water and jet fuel, the smell of the Navy. It filled my lungs, expanding my chest. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number for personnel command. "This is Commander Lester," I said, my voice strong and steady. "Reporting in, I'm ready for my next assignment." "Copy that, Commander. We have a ship deploying to the Pacific. Can you be ready in 48 hours? I looked at the horizon, where the blue of the sky met the blue of the ocean. I didn't have a mansion to go back to. I didn't have a muscle car in the garage, but I had my honor. I had my truth. And I was free. "I was born ready," I said. I hung up the phone and started walking. I didn't look back. I walked straight toward the sun, marching into the rest of my life. Looking back on this journey, I've realized a powerful truth that I want to share with you. Integrity is the only currency that never devalues. My father spent his entire life trying to secure a financial legacy, but in doing so, he bankrupted his own soul. I know how scary it is to be the black sheep, to stand alone against the people who raised you. But I learned that true family isn't defined by blood. It is defined by shared values. Please, never trade your conscience for approval. It is better to walk alone in the light of truth than to sit in a crowded room built on lies. Your honor is yours alone. Protect it. Now, I want to turn this over to you. My war is over, but I know many of you are fighting your own battles right now. Have you ever had to make a tough choice between keeping the peace in your family and standing up for your own principles? It is never easy, but your story matters to me. If my courage gave you even a little bit of strength today, please hit that subscribe button to support this channel. And do me a huge favor. Drop a comment below with the word honor if you are ready to stand tall in your own life. Thank you for listening to my truth.